Hi, my name is Dave Goldstein, and I'm an elder at Congregation Shema Israel, located in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Today, we're going to be discussing the three major Jewish holidays that occur during the fall of the year. Although we often use the word holidays to describe these occasions, most of these holidays are called feasts in the Bible. They are also referred to as sacred assemblies. These three fall holidays, as well as the four holidays that occur during the spring, are mentioned several times in the Torah. That is, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. Leviticus chapter 23, Numbers chapter 29, and Deuteronomy chapter 16 are good places to read up on these feasts. I remember the first time I heard about the amazing gospel truths that are found in these feasts. It was almost 30 years ago, and I was not a believer at that time, but was attending Congregation Shema Israel and heard Rabbi Lauren give a presentation on these holidays. I'm indebted to Rabbi Lauren, as that talk spurred me to consider faith in Messiah Yeshua, Jesus, at a deeper level, as well as learn information about the holidays, some of which is included in this presentation. Before we get into the specifics about these three fall holidays, we should take note of some general items. First off, let's talk about the total number of major holidays that are mentioned in the Torah. From what I just said a moment ago, there are 3 holidays that occur in the fall and 4 holidays that occur in the spring. Therefore, there are a total of 7 major holidays. 7 is a very important number in the Bible. The number 7 indicates completion or perfection. God created the universe in 6 days, and on the 7th day, he rested. 7, therefore, is an indication of God's totality, the summation of his perfect creation. If you study the Old Testament, you will find that certain things are associated with the number 7. There are 7 days in a week, 6 days of work, and a 7th day of rest, or Sabbath. Every 7th year, the land of Israel was supposed to experience a special rest. No crops were to be planted. Every 7 times 7 years was a sabbatical year. And then, on the 50th year, was a very special Sabbath year called the Year of Jubilee. Land was to be returned to its original owner, and slaves were to be given their freedom. So the number 7 is a special number. When we look at the timing for the major Jewish holidays, we find that the first 4 holidays fall within the first 3 months of God's year. Have any of you heard someone use the phrase God's year? Let's discuss that for a moment. I know that you're very familiar with our calendar. The first month of our year is January, and then the second month, February, until we count up to the 12th month of the year, which, of course, is December. Most of the people in the world operate to this calendar layout. However, God's calendar is different. In several places in the Old Testament, we read about God's calendar, which has a different timing than what we have from our annual calendar. Let's look at Leviticus chapter 23, verse 5. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at twilight, is the Lord's Passover. And that's from the New American Standard Bible. Passover occurs in the spring, in March or April. So the first month of God's calendar happens in the springtime, during the Hebrew calendar month of Nisan. Therefore, Passover, which is the first of the yearly holidays, falls in the first month of God's calendar. If we continue to count up the 7 holidays, we find that the last 3 holidays occur in the 7th month of God's calendar. We have not even begun to discuss these holidays yet, but if the last 3 holidays fall in the 7th month of God's calendar, and 7 is a number that is associated with God's completion or God's perfection, then perhaps you are already getting a sense that in some way these 3 holidays might be important for some type of plan that God has for completion or perfection. We'll be discussing more about that as we go forward. Before that, however, let's briefly discuss the purpose of these holidays. Why do you think these holidays were given to the Jewish people? Well, what was going on at that time? The Israelis had been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. With the occurrence of Passover, they were freed from these 400 years of slavery in Egypt. Do you think that the Jewish people were affected by Egyptian culture, worship, and other aspects of life during their 400 years in Egypt? I would say yes. So, after the Passover occurred, they were freed and they started their wandering in the wilderness. God freed them to take them as His people. He wanted a special relationship with them as He had with their ancestors. For example, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. However, as I just mentioned, we had been in slavery in Egypt for 400 years and had taken on customs and ways of the Egyptians. Egypt, as you probably remember, worshipped many gods. As the Israelis continued their sojourn in the wilderness, they came in contact with many different tribes who worshiped gods other than the one true God, the God who had freed them from Egypt. In order to draw the Israelis closer to Himself and keep them apart from those peoples who believed in many different gods, the one true God, through Moses, gave the Israelis laws, commandments, and holidays, or feasts for them to keep. Following these laws, commandments, and feasts would separate the Jewish people from the pagans they were surrounded by and teach them how to have a relationship with the one true God. These holidays were also special reminders to the Israelis. Each holiday had its own special meaning and was connected to something that God wanted the people of Israel to know or learn about Him through celebrating the holiday. Let's take Passover for an example. God redeemed the Jewish people with a mighty arm as He brought plague upon plague on the Egyptians, until, with the last plague, the death of the firstborn, the Israelis were freed from captivity. God redeemed the Jewish people from slavery. In addition, when the holidays were given to the Israelis, not only did God want them to know or learn something about Him, but He had a specific future point in time that He had in mind as well. That point was the birth, life, and death of the Messiah. Not only were these Jewish holidays a way to understand and know God better, but these holidays were also a foreshadowing of the Son. Let's again take a look at Passover. The Jewish people were redeemed out of Egypt by the blood of the innocent lamb, which, when applied to the doors of their houses, allowed the angel of death to pass over that house, thereby sparing the firstborn from death. Yeshua, Jesus, came to earth so that when He died and shed His innocent blood upon the cross, those of us who apply that blood to our lives, in other words, those of us who believe in God through the Son, we will be passed over as well and spared from our slavery to sin. To make this point even more strongly, the Messiah died exactly on Passover in fulfillment of this incredible holiday. Finally, these holidays were not just celebrated during a limited period of time. They were given by Moses approximately 3,500 years ago, and they are still being celebrated by traditional Jews, Messianic Jews, and some Gentile Christians, even today. There is continuity from the time the holidays were given until today, and the holidays are even more meaningful when observed through the context of the Messiah. Although we will not be talking about the first 4 holidays today, the first 4 holidays of the year were fulfilled by the Messiah when He was on earth 2,000 years ago. The last 3 holidays have yet to be fulfilled. They point to the second coming of the Messiah, a time when God's perfect plan will be fulfilled. The first of the four holidays is called Yom Teruah, or the Day of Trumpets. Although this holiday is now known as Rosh Hashanah, or the Jewish New Year, in God's calendar, we're not in the first month. We are actually in the seventh month. For this holiday, we are told to blow the trumpet. This trumpet is not clearly defined here, but it is understood to be the shofar, a trumpet usually made out of a ram's horn. In ancient Israel, the trumpet was blown for several reasons. It was blown if there was danger. It was blown to assemble the people. It was also blown to announce that the king was coming. Prophetically, this holiday speaks to the return of the king. At some future point in time, the king will return to planet Earth. And indeed, in Revelation, the return of the Messiah is announced by great blasts of the trumpet. Another interesting note about this holiday is that it falls at the beginning of the Jewish month. In fact, it is the only one of the major holidays to fall at the beginning of a Jewish month. All the other holidays fall on or close to the middle of the month. Well, for a lunar calendar cycle, the middle of the month is when the full moon occurs. The beginning of the month is when there is a new moon. In other words, the moon can barely be seen, if at all. And prophetically, in the book by the prophet Joel, in chapter 2, verse 31, we read about a day of darkness and gloom, where the sun is turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is a reference to the coming of the Messiah. And in verse 32, we read that everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. As we celebrate Yom Teruah at the beginning of the seventh biblical Hebrew month with a dark sky and all the symbolism involved with the blowing of the shofar, we are reminded of this prophecy, which foreshadows the return of Messiah Yeshua. And more importantly, we should be reminded not to wait until it is too late to call upon the name of the Lord. In other words, come to belief in Messiah Yeshua. The next holiday is the Day of Atonement. It falls on the 10th day of the 7th month. This is the most holy day on God's calendar. This is the one day of the year when the high priest could enter the most holy place of the tabernacle. Now, the most holy place of the tabernacle, later the temple, to sprinkle the blood of the sacrifice upon the Ark of the Covenant, to seek God's atonement, God's forgiveness for all the people of Israel. The rabbis teach that the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah, Yom Teruah, and Yom Kippur are known as the days of awe, and that man has these 10 days to get right with God and with other humans. The teaching is that if you do not get right with God and with your fellow man by the end of Yom Kippur, you will die and be written out of the book of life. Prophetically, this holiday speaks of a great judgment that is to come. At a time after Messiah returns to earth, there will be a great judgment. Messiah will judge the nations. Matthew chapter 25 speaks of this event. In it, we read about the sheep and the goats. The sheep are those people who believe that Jesus is the Messiah and that God sent his Son to this world to die on a cross, to have victory over sin once and for all, to be resurrected, and that Jesus sits at the right hand of God. The sheep know Messiah and recognize his voice. These people will be welcomed into God's kingdom. However, there are also goats. The goats are those people who do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, do not believe that God sent his Son to this world, do not believe that Jesus won the victory over sin, and do not believe that Jesus was resurrected and sits at the right hand of God. They will not be welcomed into the kingdom of God. That brings us to Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, the seventh holiday in the seventh month. In ancient Israel, we were instructed to build booths, temporary dwellings. We were to decorate these booths with the fruits of the harvest and live in them during the duration of this holiday. And even today, there are still people who build these booths and take their meals in them and sleep in them during the holiday. However, these booths are only temporary. They go up one week and they come down the next. They remind us of the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness after the Exodus from Egypt and how we are still wandering through this world today. Prophetically, this holiday speaks of the temporary nature of life in this world. The world that we live in is only temporary. For example, even if we live to be 150 years old, what is that span of time compared to eternity? It is only a blip. Life in this world is temporary. We are only passing through. However, there is a place that is eternal. In John chapter 14, Yeshua tells his disciples that there are many rooms in his Father's house and that he is going there to prepare a place for them. While life in this world is temporary, life in God's house is eternal, and Messiah has gone to prepare a place for us there. At the end of this age, God will gather the fruit of redeemed humanity into his kingdom. This is the goal of God's efforts in human history, leading to the eternal kingdom which awaits redeemed humanity. God has a master plan to save fallen humanity, which is revealed in the Jewish holidays. The first four holidays point us to understanding Yeshua's first coming and the salvation which he brought and made available to all mankind. Once you have accepted Yeshua as your Lord and Savior, you can look forward to his return, represented by the three fall holidays. You can look forward to his return from heaven, represented by the Day of Trumpets. As part of Yom Kippur, you need to remember that when he returns to planet Earth, judgment will take place. Those who believe in him will not be condemned, but have already passed out of judgment and into life. Then, at the very end, as we are reminded by the holiday of Sukkot, you will be welcomed into that glorious and eternal kingdom awaiting redeemed humanity. Then those that have been reconciled to the God of Israel through the wonderful Messiah, whom he sent, will reign with him forever and ever, which is the fulfillment of this seventh and last holiday. Yeshua is the fulfillment of these holy days. He has filled them full of meaning and significance for anyone who desires to celebrate them. Do you know him? I hope so. Your eternal destiny depends on it. Thank you.